In the bustling city of Crestwood, where skyscrapers touched the clouds and the streets were always alive with activity, there was a place that stood out among the rest: the Crestwood Chronicle, the city's most prestigious newspaper. It was a place where journalists worked tirelessly, chasing stories and meeting deadlines. But one fateful evening, the Chronicle became the center of a mystery that would leave the entire city in shock. It was a rainy Thursday night, and the newsroom was buzzing with activity. The deadline for the morning edition was fast approaching, and everyone was working at a frantic pace. Among the reporters was Richard Grayson, a seasoned journalist known for his sharp wit and even sharper pen. Richard had been working on a groundbreaking expose about corruption in the city council, and he was determined to get it published. But as the clock struck 10 p.m., the newsroom was suddenly plunged into chaos. A loud scream echoed through the room, and everyone turned to see Richard slumped over his desk, lifeless. His computer screen was still glowing, displaying the unfinished article he had been working on. The police were called in, and Detective Clara Hayes was assigned to the case. Clara was a no-nonsense investigator with a keen eye for detail. She quickly secured the scene and began her investigation. The first thing Clara noticed was the half-empty coffee cup on Richard's desk. She carefully bagged it as evidence, suspecting that it might contain traces of poison. She then turned her attention to Richard's computer. The last document he had been working on was his expose, but it was incomplete. Clara wondered if someone had wanted to silence Richard before he could reveal the truth. Clara began by questioning Richard's colleagues. The first person she spoke to was Emily Carter, Richard's editor. Emily was visibly shaken by his death and insisted that Richard had been under a lot of pressure to meet the deadline. She also mentioned that Richard had been receiving threatening emails ever since he started working on the expose. Next, Clara interviewed Mark Thompson, a fellow reporter who had been sitting next to Richard. Mark claimed that he had been too focused on his own work to notice anything unusual. However, Clara noticed that Mark seemed nervous and was avoiding eye contact. The third person Clara spoke to was Sarah Mitchell, the office intern. Sarah had been running errands for the reporters all evening and had seen Richard just minutes before his death. She mentioned that Richard had been arguing with someone on the phone, but she couldn't hear the details of the conversation. Clara's next step was to examine Richard's emails. She found the threatening messages that Emily had mentioned, but they were all from anonymous senders. However, one email caught her attention: a message from an unknown sender with the subject line "Deadline." The email contained a single sentence: "You have until 10 p.m. Clara's mind raced. Was this a warning? Had someone given Richard until 10 p.m. to stop working on his expose or face the consequences? She decided to dig deeper. She revisited Mark Thompson, the nervous reporter. This time, she pressed him harder, and eventually he broke down. Mark confessed that he had been working as a mole for the city council, feeding them information about Richard's investigation. He admitted that he had been the one sending the threatening emails, but he swore that he had nothing to do with Richard's death. Clara wasn't convinced. She decided to check Mark's alibi. She reviewed the security footage from the newsroom and noticed something odd. At 9:55 p.m., just 5 minutes before Richard's death, Mark had left his desk and gone to the break room. He had returned just after 10 p.m. looking visibly shaken. Clara confronted Mark with this evidence, and he finally confessed. He had laced Richard's coffee with a slow-acting poison, hoping to silence him without drawing suspicion. The deadline email had been his way of warning Richard to stop his investigation. But when Richard ignored it, Mark had taken drastic measures. With Mark's confession, the case was closed. Richard's expose was published posthumously, and the city council's corruption was brought to light. Detective Clara Hayes had solved the mystery of death by deadline, but the cost had been high. Richard Grayson's death served as a grim reminder of the dangers that journalists sometimes face in their pursuit of the truth.